James raised his wine glass with that performative confidence he always summoned when he wanted to be the center of the room. We were at his parents' long Easter table, surrounded by his siblings, their spouses, even two of his business partners. The roast lamb had just been carved. Wine had been flowing. Conversation was light, until James stood up. "I have something to share," he said, placing his glass down carefully. His voice had that rehearsed sincerity that always made my skin crawl. "Elizabeth and I have decided to go our separate ways. It's amicable. We've simply grown apart." He even smiled. Like he expected polite nods and awkward sympathy. I didn't look at him. I looked at his mother, then his sister, and then, finally, I met his eyes. "I'm glad you've finally brought this into the open," I said, calmly. "My attorney will be contacting yours tomorrow regarding the asset documentation I submitted to the SEC. Oh, and by the way, Alan and Priya should be calling any minute now." James blinked. His glass didn't shatter, but I could tell his stomach did. His phone buzzed on the table. Once. Twice. 3 times. No one said a word. I smiled faintly, picked up my napkin, and gently placed it on the table. "Thank you for dinner," I said, turning to his parents. "It's been a lovely evening." And with that, I stood up, adjusted my coat, and walked out. Not because I was angry. Not because I needed to run. But because everything that needed to be said had already been done. 15 years earlier, I had walked down the aisle believing I'd found a partner. James was charming, ambitious, and incredibly persuasive. We were both in finance, him in investments, me in analysis. We spoke the same language: numbers, strategy, long-term value. Back then, he used to call us a merger. That should have been my first red flag. But I was young, and I loved the idea of building something with someone who wasn't afraid of hard work or risk. For the first few years, we were a team. I worked long hours at a major firm while James chased venture capital for a hedge fund that never really took off. I paid the bills, covered his student loans, and cooked dinner between spreadsheet reviews. When he finally landed his first major investor and started Morgan Equity Strategies, I celebrated like it was ours. Because it was. I reviewed his contracts, helped build his pitch decks, even introduced him to 2 of his earliest investors, Alan and Priya. They were friends of mine before they were his. But I never asked for recognition. I believed in him. I believed in us. That started to change 3 years ago. James's phone started buzzing more during dinner. His trips became longer. His explanations shorter. "Client emergencies," he'd say. "Market volatility." I understood stress. I understood the business. But what I didn't understand was how I had suddenly become invisible in a marriage I had helped build. He changed his passwords. He stopped CCing me on client briefs. And then I noticed the spending. First, it was a pair of diamond earrings, $4,200 charged to our joint card. I never saw them. Then a weekend getaway to Newport while I was supposedly at a conference in Chicago. That was news to me. So I did what I do best: I analyzed. Quietly. I reviewed the past 12 months of our financial activity. I pulled statements. Cross-referenced travel receipts with his calendar. And when I saw the patterns: hotels, restaurants, high-end boutiques, I didn't cry. I called a private investigator. I wasn't just looking for cheating. I was looking for movement. Financial, legal, emotional. And I found it all. James was having an affair with Chloe, his 26-year-old executive assistant. She wasn't just in his bed, she was in our books. I found wire transfers to accounts under his company's name that should have raised alarms at any bank. He was slowly moving money out of our joint portfolio and into investment vehicles tied to shell companies I'd never heard of. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditation. He wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to cut me out, completely. So I made a plan of my own. And unlike James, I didn't leave fingerprints. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because what I needed wasn't an apology. It was leverage. The moment I saw those transfers, our joint savings siphoned into operational reserves for Morgan Equity, I knew what he was doing. It wasn't just hiding assets. It was setting up a financial escape route. One that would leave me stranded with nothing but tax liability and a broken marriage. So I opened a fresh notebook. Labeled it in clean block letters, protection. I started documenting everything. Every statement. Every login. Every sudden business loss that didn't line up with market conditions. Every line on our tax returns that had changed from the prior year. James didn't know that while he was slipping off to client dinners, I was running private audits on his company. I had access. He'd never revoked my backdoor login from when I helped him set up the books. Rookie mistake. That's when I saw it. The payouts he was making to investors were coming from incoming client capital. Not profit. Not gains. New money funding old promises. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was fraud. A Ponzi scheme in its earliest form. If I didn't act, I could be complicit. I could be liable. If the SEC investigated and I hadn't reported it, I'd go down with him. So I called someone I trusted, Carla, an attorney I'd worked with during a corporate ethics training seminar years back. She picked up on the second ring. I didn't waste time. Carla, I think my husband is about to leave me bankrupt and federally indicted. She met me the next morning with a legal pad, 2 pens, and a calm so steady it almost made me cry. We went over everything. She made copies. Logged timelines. Had me back up all digital records to a secure drive in her office. We worked late into the evening creating a financial mirror, my own private reconstruction of James's empire, line by line, account by account. Then we went silent. For 3 weeks, I kept up the act. I smiled at dinners. Kissed him goodnight. Played the role of the unsuspecting wife. Meanwhile, I transferred my personal assets, an inheritance from my grandmother, my retirement fund, my premarital savings, into secure, separate accounts in my name alone. Legally protected. No joint signature. No loopholes. I froze our joint lines of credit. Quietly pulled my name from any account that could be weaponized. Then, with Carla's help, I reached out to Alan and Priya. I didn't accuse James of anything. I simply forwarded them a PDF with a subject line that read, "Out of professional obligation." Inside was everything. Account histories. Transaction timelines. Investor statements cross-referenced with false payout logs. Language James had used that danced just on the edge of legality, but never far enough to appear honest. Within 24 hours, Priya called me directly. "Thank you for sending this," she said. "I had a feeling. But you've just confirmed it." I said nothing. Because I wasn't looking for praise. I was looking for protection. And I had just built it, brick by brick. While James was planning my erasure, I was preparing his exposure. Easter Sunday arrived with the kind of curated perfection James loved to orchestrate. His parents' brownstone in Beacon Hill was lit up, the table set with sterling silver, monogrammed cloth napkins, and the same expensive French wine he used to impress clients. There were 15 people in the room, family friends, and, not coincidentally, both Alan and Priya. I wore cream. Simple. Classic. I smiled, I served myself scalloped potatoes, I passed the bread without shaking. James sat at the head of the table like a king in his last moments of rule, completely unaware that his crown was about to fall off his head and land in the soup. Halfway through the meal, just as dessert was being brought out, he stood and gently tapped his glass with a butter knife. The room fell quiet. "I wanted to take a moment to share something," he said, looking down at his wineglass, spinning it like he was savoring the vintage. "Elizabeth and I have decided to go our separate ways. It's mutual, amicable. These things happen when people grow apart." I could feel the pause in the room. Everyone turned to me, waiting for the tears, the embarrassment, the expected breakdown. Instead, I dabbed my lips with my napkin, looked up, and smiled. "I'm glad you brought this into the open, James," I said, clear and measured. "My attorney will be contacting yours first thing tomorrow. I've already submitted financial documentation to the SEC regarding Morgan Equity's irregular investor reports." The pause shifted. James's face dropped by 2 full shades of color. His smile faltered, just a twitch at first, then vanished completely. "Oh," I added, reaching for my glass. "Alan and Priya should be in touch soon, too." Right on cue, James's phone buzzed on the table. Then again. Then again. He didn't reach for it. Couldn't. His hands had turned to stone. I looked at his mother, who looked between us in confusion. His sister's mouth was slightly open, her fork halfway to her plate. I stood. Smoothed the fabric of my dress. "Thank you all for your kindness these past 15 years, I said softly. "I've always appreciated how welcoming you were. And I truly wish you all the best." Then I turned to James. "You may want to excuse yourself, too. It seems your firm has a few urgent matters to address." And just like that, I walked out. No tears. No screaming. No drama. Only the clean, shattering silence of a plan executed perfectly. I got into my car and closed the door, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. My phone buzzed once. "Carla." I answered with a single word. "It's done." She didn't ask for details. SEC logged the formal complaint. Alan's legal team reached out, they're preparing a separate filing. Priya's already frozen her equity share. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Good. When I got home, I changed out of my dress and sat on the edge of the bed, not to cry, but to breathe. Deep, full breaths. The kind you don't even realize you've been holding for years. James didn't come home that night. Instead, I watched from the upstairs window as an unfamiliar black car pulled into the driveway around 1 a.m. He sat inside for a long time, engine idling, before finally pulling away. No bags. No confrontation. Just distance. In the days that followed, the fallout was surgical. Alan's lawyers filed a formal complaint with the Massachusetts Securities Division, citing misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. Priya pulled all of her capital and released a public statement to the firm's investors, worded carefully, but unmistakably damning. Morgan Equity Strategies began hemorrhaging clients by the hour. James's face showed up in a brief financial news blurb by Friday morning. Local investment firm under review for potential misreporting of returns. Nothing explosive, yet. But the real storm had already begun behind closed doors. My divorce attorney filed on my behalf the following Monday, accompanied by a 94-page portfolio of financial documentation tracing every illegal transfer, forged signature, and questionable asset movement James had orchestrated. Thanks to my quiet preparation, every major asset had already been frozen, every joint account flagged, every lawyer briefed. There were no negotiations. There was only evidence. James attempted to reach out once. A short, spineless email that read, "Can we handle this privately? No need to destroy everything." I didn't reply. My attorney did. By the end of the month, the court had granted a temporary restraining order against asset manipulation and ordered a full forensic audit. Carla coordinated with the SEC to ensure all testimony I provided was protected and submitted under legal shielding. I was clean. Untouchable. James was not. I learned later that Chloe had quietly resigned after her name appeared in one of the internal expense memos. She left no forwarding contact. No goodbye. The empire he built on silence and ego was collapsing, because he'd never planned for someone like me to be paying attention. He thought I would fall apart. But I didn't fall. I documented. I calculated. And then I moved first. The weeks that followed moved with a strange, calculated rhythm: hearings, filings, review boards, frozen accounts, back-to-back calls with attorneys and investigators. I kept a whiteboard in my home office with every timeline, every contact, every task still pending. It looked like something out of a law enforcement war room. And in a way, it was. Because I wasn't just unraveling a marriage. I was dismantling a system, one James had spent years building on deception and my silence. The forensic audit revealed even more than I expected. He'd used fake consulting invoices to mask internal transfers. Claimed losses that didn't exist. Took out a loan against our joint property without my knowledge and funneled it into a shell company that paid Chloe under the guise of advisory work. It was worse than shady. It was criminal. The SEC escalated their inquiry into a full investigation. Meanwhile, Alan and Priya formally withdrew their partnership and filed independent lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. Investors began lining up with legal counsel of their own. A firm that once boasted $40 million in assets was now barely keeping its name off the headlines. As for the divorce? Clean. Surgical. Brutal. Thanks to the documentation I'd spent months collecting, every asset James tried to hide was traced and legally reclaimed. The court granted me a significant share of the firm's remaining legitimate holdings and full ownership of our home, vehicles, and investment accounts. But the most powerful part wasn't what I received, it was what I protected. I kept my name clear. My future secure. And I did it without breaking a single law or raising my voice. James, on the other hand, was unraveling. He'd gone from dismissive to furious to desperate in the span of a month. I heard he tried to convince his family that I'd set him up. That I was the villain. But no one bought it, not after the dinner, not after the phone calls, and certainly not after the legal findings. I ran into his mother once, at a grocery store, of all places. She looked tired. Hollowed out. She pulled her cart alongside mine and said quietly, "I'm sorry for what he did to you." I didn't know. I really didn't. I nodded, then said the only honest thing I could. Neither did I. Until I did. And that was enough. By the end of the quarter, James's firm was effectively dead. His licenses suspended. Lawsuits stacked like dominoes. I could have taken it public, done an interview, told my story, watched him burn in every financial blog and business column. But I didn't. Because I didn't need the attention. I already had the outcome. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I moved into a sunlit condo overlooking the Charles River. It wasn't extravagant, just intentional. Clean lines, quiet corners, a wall of windows where light poured in each morning as if to remind me that I had stepped out of the shadows and into my own story. I furnished the place slowly. I picked out everything myself, down to the drawer handles and the teacups. I'd spent 15 years making decisions for two. Now, each choice was entirely mine. And yet, I didn't feel alone. I felt solid. With part of the settlement money, I launched something I'd dreamed of for years but never had the clarity, or courage, to pursue, the Morgan Foundation, named not for James, but for the woman who survived him. A nonprofit offering financial literacy workshops, asset protection planning, and legal resource referrals for women navigating divorce or economic betrayal. We held our first workshop 6 weeks after launch. The room was small, maybe 20 women, some young, some older, all with that same weary tightness in their eyes. I stood in front of them, not as a victim, not as a savior, but as someone who knew the terrain. Start with your name, I told them. Then your passwords. Then your paper trail. Don't wait for them to come clean. Build your own truth. A woman in the back cried quietly the entire session. Afterward, she hugged me and whispered, "I thought I was crazy." But I wasn't. He just never expected me to be prepared. I hugged her tighter. None of them do. The foundation grew. So did I. I traveled, to London, Lisbon, Montreal. Places James always said we were too busy to visit. I went alone, with a carry-on and a plan, and came back each time with a new stamp in my passport and a little more air in my lungs. I never saw James again. Not in courtrooms. Not in hallways. Not in passing. He had disappeared into the legal system he once believed he was above. Last I heard, he was living in a rented apartment outside Providence, no license, no investors, no Chloe. The house of cards had fallen. And me? I'd stopped checking for debris. I wasn't waiting for apologies or karma. I had something better. Clarity. On my bedroom mirror, taped just at eye level, is a note I wrote the day I served him his own collapse. It says, "They thought I didn't know. They thought I wouldn't act. They forgot, I do numbers for a living. And that's how I learned. The cleanest revenge isn't loud. It's legal. It's strategic. And it hits hardest when they never see it coming. And that's how I learned that sometimes the most powerful move isn't confrontation. It's quiet, lawful precision. Ever been betrayed by someone who underestimated you? Tell me in the comments. Like this if you believe revenge doesn't need rage, it just needs receipts. And subscribe for more true stories of calm, calculated justice.